Welcome to the France 24 debate. Keep calm and carry on, a phrase adopted on the other side of the English Channel to sum up the British phlegmatic spirit. So perhaps it's no surprise that we're now in yet another extended period of discussion and negotiation about Brexit. The Sunday deadline to sort out a trade deal came and went with no tangible progress, except a commitment to carry on. And underneath all that, keep calm. Let's hear first from Prime Minister Johnson and then the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
But I've got to repeat, the most likely thing now is, of course, that we have to get ready for WTO terms, Australia terms. And don't forget, everybody, we've made huge preparations for this. We've now been at this for 4.5 years. Let's see what we can achieve. But in the meantime, get ready with confidence for January the 1st, trade on WTO terms if we have to.
First of all, there's movement. That is good. And the transition period ends. So we're talking about a new beginning with old friends, but we should also be clear from the 1st of January on, and this is in 3 weeks, the UK will be a third country to the European Union. And what we have sorted out such a package already in the agreement.
The Brexit referendum, of course, was in June 2016, before the UK election. A year ago, Johnson was campaigning to get Brexit done. He boasted of having an oven-ready deal. This is what the Conservatives tweeted a year ago, but that's Boris Johnson's Twitter account there. And it was accompanied by this following video. Let's show you an excerpt.
This is the oven-ready pie. We're here at the Red Olive Pie Making Facility in Derby, where we've just made a symbol of what we intend to do if we're lucky enough to get a working majority Conservative government. Get Brexit done, put the deal that we've got ready to go in the oven, take it out before Christmas, move our country forward. We put it in, slam it in the oven, take it out, there it is, get Brexit done, take the country forward, unite and level up. How can we express this idea more succinctly and more clearly? There it is. Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, anyway, thanks very much. Thank you. Red Olive for your help. Thank you all. Thank you.
We saw the pie. Today those claims perhaps appear a little bit half-baked at best. If the sticking points of the Brexit deal are known, and they are, so where's the problem? Our guests perhaps might be able to throw some fresh light on the subject. With no further delay, let's bring them in, or introduce them at least here in Paris. Yves Bertoncini, expert and consultant on European affairs, president of the movement Européen France. Yves, thank you very much for being with us. With you in a moment. In Brussels, the person who's followed this story for us from the very start, and he's tried to explain every twist and turn very patiently for the likes of me, France 24's correspondent in Brussels, Dave Keating. Dave, thanks for joining us. In London, David Hennig, director of UK Trade Policy Project and part of the European Centre for International Political Economy. David, thanks for agreeing to join us. And also in London, Ute Steiger, who's Executive Director of the UCL European Institute and editor, along with Benjamin Martil, of the book Brexit and Beyond, Rethinking the Futures of Europe. Thank you all for joining us. Ute, I will start with you. And the title of the book that you've been involved with very much throws us forward to the question of what happens next. Are you surprised, disappointed, or kind of did you expect to be in the situation we are in now? I'm not really knowing what's going to happen next.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me. I'm not surprised that we are finding ourselves in a difficult position at this in these negotiations. They were always going to be rather drawn out and rather difficult to conduct. What I do admit to finding myself surprised at is just how far they have gone to basically transgress all deadlines that we ever thought were possible. Trade negotiations, and this is where we are at, of course, don't usually go so far down the wire. And yes, obviously, internal negotiations within the EU very often do, and I think it was much expected here that that would be the sort of thing that the UK side would want to see happening, but that it goes this far down the wire is really something that we didn't quite expect.
Indeed, many people around you sharing that feeling, I'm sure. Let's go to David Hennig, who's well, near you in London, different place, of course. Let's just explain to people who are joining us, of course, everyone's joining us at a distance because of social distancing and keeping our guests apart because of COVID-19. But, of course, people in London joining us via satellite or Skype as per usual. David, one of those. David, director of the UK Trade Policy Project. Thanks for being with us, sir. We appreciate your time. Boris Johnson talking about 4.5 years and huge preparation being done. Do you believe him, or is this more kind of, how can I put it, lip service, political speak?
Well, the UK has done a certain amount of work to be ready for Brexit, but there's huge questions remaining. January the 1st is the biggest change in trade relations that the UK will have experienced in a generation, possibly ever. This is £2 billion of trade per day between the UK and the EU nearly. So, and that is going to go from a single market basis, which is basically more or less free of checks, to a trade agreement or even a WTO basis, which has lots of checks, may have tariffs, and all manner of restrictions on trade. Big change. We're not quite ready for it. And we're not quite sure what's going to come next for the UK economy, how the UK economy will adjust. In the event of no deal, threats by the likes of Nissan, Toyota that their car plants will be unsustainable, threats of tariffs affecting UK food prices. There's a lot to unpack within this for the UK, and it's not obvious that we're completely on top of everything or the Prime Minister is all over the detail. That's not necessarily his strength in any case.
Indeed, you mentioned, we'll come back to Boris's strengths and his weaknesses in a moment, but you mentioned Sunderland. And again, sort of the Nissan factory up there, people up there voted very strongly for Brexit. I saw them on British TV News saying that they're kind of happy with what's happening, although not really able to quantify exactly what is happening. Yves Bertoncini in Paris from the Mouvement Européen France. Thank you for joining us, sir. Your situation, very pro-Europe, I know. Your feeling about what's happening, perhaps one that a regret that the UK is leaving, but that is happening. What do you think can happen next? Is a no deal going to be a disaster that many people are saying, or do you think a deal can actually happen? I've got so many questions. Try and answer a few of them, please, Yves.
Well, of course, it's a regret to see them leaving, but it's a democratic choice to be respected. So now the problem is not leaving, but till where? We have set the divorce phase. I mean, we are not married any longer. There is a withdrawal agreement. This is done. Now we're going to try and define the elements of a kind of civil union, a new partnership between the UK, which remains a very important partner and a strategic actor at the world level, and the European Union and the continent. So either there is such a partnership for the interest of both parts, or there won't be, and then there will be a no deal. The no deal means what Boris Johnson has said, a WTO status, such as for Australia. But the big difference is that we're neighbors, we are interdependent, we have a lot of human economic ties. So it would be very, very costly for us and for them. We did not ask the divorce. It would be costly for the Brits, but maybe Boris Johnson believes that he can afford it. Because after all, he has a mandate, which is not the case for the Europeans. I mean, if you look at the French, they never asked for such a divorce. So now we have to face this asymmetry, and the negotiation is facing this asymmetry. Politically, Boris Johnson has a leverage because he has a mandate. He could afford maybe politically a no deal, despite the huge economic cost. And for us, I would say, and in particular for the French, it's the other way around. Because the economic cost would be important, but not that substantial. But politically, it would be more difficult to face, for example, for Emmanuel Macron. So I hope, against this background, that a deal will be met by the end of the month, and that we will be able to build a new relationships between the two major partners. I mean, again, the UK and the EU. So to face world challenge we have to face in common, and I could elaborate more on this if you want a bit later on.
Indeed, we're always interested to hear you elaborate on the finer details of this, which we always appreciate. There were very few fine details in Boris Johnson's campaigning last year. Let's, as we're talking, show you some images of one of the great things that he did to try to capture the imagination of the British public and get them to vote for him to get Brexit done. Driving, I think it's a tractor or a forklift through a wall, which is meant to be illustrate how Britain is bursting out of Europe Those images will come on your screens any moment now. Dave Keating, well, we're seeing those there. Get Brexit done, it said on the front of that bulldozer. True Boris fashion, as you might put it, but many people think, of course, that there's so much blunder that goes with the imagery. But there you go. So obviously you either like him or you loathe him, and that's one of the things. And as our guest was saying, it's a democratic choice that needs to be respected. Dave Keating, you've been observing the matters from, obviously last week we spoke about the fish supper that the two main players had, Boris Johnson and Ursula von der Leyen, turbot and scallops on the menu. Of course, one of the issues that the dispute here, of course, is access to fishing rights and fishing zones. In terms of what we're going to happen this weekend, you were very sceptical when we spoke last week about a result happening, and here we are, the extension again. What is the feeling you're getting where you are in Brussels?
It's really hard to tell because at this stage, the talks are just in a very, very tight circle and there's not a lot of information coming out. We really don't know if we can believe either side. Today from the European side, we were getting a lot of noises. No, we're making progress. Some good progress has been made in the last 24 hours. Ursula von der Leyen said that to the European Parliament today, and then the UK side is briefing us, no progress. There hasn't been any significant progress. And we just don't know who to believe. There certainly isn't any sign of significant progress so far from what we're hearing. What we do know is that they are going to keep talking until December 31st. That is the new deadline, and that is a real deadline this time, because that's the end of the transition period. It's when the UK will leave the single market, and the big question is, will the UK leave the single market with a free trade deal? I think as David was just saying there, Boris Johnson is right to say that the UK has been preparing for 4 years for leaving the EU, but he was pretty dishonest there in that soundbite we played, because he was talking specifically about leaving on so-called Australia-style terms, which is a nonsense term. It's no deal. And the UK has not been preparing to leave on no deal terms for 4 years. 4 years ago, nobody was talking about the prospect of the UK leaving the EU with absolutely no free trade deal in place. That wasn't in the referendum. That wasn't talked about in the months after the referendum. It's only in the past months when the UK started talking about the idea that having no deal and being on WTO terms would be a good thing that you'd actually want to plan for. That may be what they've decided to project now, but it is definitely not true to say that they've been preparing for that eventuality for 4 years.
David, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to London, where we have Uta Steger and David Henning waiting for us. Uta, I'll bring you in first. The reaction, Dave saying there, no one talking about the possibility of falling out of the EU with no deal. Now, Boris Johnson saying this looks like the most likely outcome of the situation. I'm wondering how people around you are reacting to that. Are you getting any kind of feeling from people that they feel they've been betrayed?
Well, that's very hard to say. You see, I think as we all agree, there still tends to be the problem of echo chambers, both on social media and generally among the people that you talk to. I think people betrayed is very hard depending on the kind of constituency that you talk to. It is not quite true that no deal has never been an option. It is very true that no deal wasn't an option in any of the pre-referendum debates, certainly not. And very early on in the negotiations, also people were discussing different kinds of deals that they wanted to see happening. But no deal really came in then quite strongly with Theresa May, who coined the famous no deal's better than a bad deal. And it's always been pushed out by the UK government as a sort of hard bargaining strategy to say, well, we can always walk away and we won't be afraid of doing that. So that has certainly been around, and in interesting ways, in fact, that sort of option has become even consolidated, I would like to say, not just in the last few months, but really over the past year at least. There were certainly questions around the withdrawal agreement already, and now in the trade talks again, the option's been on the table constantly. Depending then on who you speak to, people would say they'd be betrayed if they don't get no deal, or they'd be betrayed, obviously, if they get no deal at all. Generally speaking, those who would be feeling comfortable with the idea of no deal are either those absolutely convinced that it would be a short destructive, creative part of an economic readjustment, and also think that they would be able to navigate it well. Or I suppose those who don't quite believe that the consequences would be quite as disastrous as they would likely be. Everyone else would be quite wary, one hopes at least, of a no-deal scenario, because in the end, what was voted on in this country at the time was for a new relationship with the European Union, and the idea that we would not have one formalised by a trade deal was not even contemplated at the time.
Ursula von der Leyen talking about a new beginning. It's not quite the same thing, is it, as what we're hearing is the likely outcome. I'm bringing in David Hennig to talk about, you mentioned Sunderland, David, and obviously the possibility there is that the Nissan factory might close given the situation. They might come away, and obviously for that region economically, it would be a really bitter pill to swallow, wouldn't it?
That's right. Indeed, apart from Brexit featuring in the last UK election, there was also the concept of rebalancing, which meant more investment and more jobs in the north of England, traditionally known for manufacturing. Now, all analysis suggests that actually Brexit as a whole, and no-deal Brexit in particular, would hit manufacturing disproportionately because of the tariffs, because it would no longer be economical to run a car plant to send cars to Europe, which is what currently happens. So there's a big contradiction within Brexit there. And what I think we find in the UK at the moment is denial, really, that this is going to happen. We have to remember that since 1992, the UK has not experienced borders in any particular way. And there is a sense one gets that this is now felt to be the norm around the world, and that there's a big shock coming on January the 1st when people realise that, in fact, borders weren't removed around the rest of the world. It was only within the EU. Now, clearly, some of that shock may well be directed towards the EU, blaming them and claiming that it's all of their fault for queues of lorries, for example, or indeed for car plants closing. But this is a logical extension of Brexit, of potentially the UK cutting itself off from manufacturing supply chains that operate across Europe. So it's quite a worrying moment for the UK economy. For those of us who look at that, we're not quite sure we know what we see in the future, how the UK economy will adjust, but it will certainly have to adjust because it will change as a result of the new barriers to trade between the UK and the EU.
Indeed, and speaking as a journalist, I'll say 4 decades of negative reporting by British journalists about the European Union, about its involvement and what it does or doesn't do, has really in many ways betrayed the British public and not giving them the correct view of what the EU did positively. There were negatives, there were positives, but certainly all you ever read about in the British press were the negatives. That's it for part 1. Stay with us, more to come, part 2 coming up.
Today, after...
Welcome back. Brexit is the subject of our debate, and the clock is ticking towards the December the 31st deadline, and the words "no deal" are echoing around Brussels and London. Boris Johnson is being seen by some senior Conservatives as central to the problem. Former EU Commissioner Chris Patten, known and respected as a Tory grandee, has been extremely critical of Johnson in the France 24 interview. Let's listen.
I'm as puzzled as you are at how it is that we have a government allegedly conservative, which seems to be intent on turning its back on our biggest trade partner, a trade partner which we've helped to create. It was Margaret Thatcher who was the main proponent of the single market and has done so while constantly being in a state of mendacity and self-delusion. So I'm worried about it. But if it happens, as I fear it may, I obviously want Britain to do as well as possible in very difficult circumstances. None of us wants ill of our country, and you can bet your bottom dollar that when things do go wrong, people like me, people who wanted to stay in the European Union, will be blamed. And if we point out that they're going wrong, we'll be accused of being traitors and supporting other countries. It's a very poisonous atmosphere created by all this, and it's not helped by the personality of our Prime Minister.
Who you would describe as?
I would describe as not somebody that you would want to trust very far.
Chris Patton there, very critical of Boris Johnson. On that issue of trade, David Henning in part one said $2 billion worth each day to the UK and the EU. Chris Patton, correct when he said it's obviously a huge market which the UK in some way seems to be turning its back on. We'll have more on that, of course. And there's much more on the criticism of Boris Johnson. Philip Hammond's words in the Financial Times back in September, just after leaving, September 2019, just after leaving the post of Chancellor of the Exchequer, echoing suspicions of many that there are hedge funds that will cash in big time in the case of a no deal, betting on a dramatic fall in the British pound. Hammond writing, Boris Johnson, is backed by speculators who've bet billions on a hard Brexit, and there's only one outcome that works for them: a crash-out, no-deal Brexit that sends the currency tumbling and inflation soaring. We know what that means for ordinary people. David Hennig, can I bring you in first? Chris Patton's words, perhaps echoing some of the things you were saying. I mean, certainly you pointed out in part one the size of the trade that already exists between the UK and the EU. David Hennig, if I could bring you in to sort of comment more on what Chris Patton was saying about the fact that perhaps the UK in some way turning its back now on its biggest trading partner.
Certainly, sorry for the delay. Certainly, it does seem that the UK wants to trade more globally instead of simply with the EU. The problem with that is that it's very difficult to make up that volume of trade that we have with the EU with other trade partners. There's no trade partner anything like that size. The next largest trade partner is the US, but a lot of that is services trade between different entities. In terms of goods trade, it's a huge partnership between the UK and the EU, and the worry is that UK trade will diminish as a whole as a result of this. That we simply won't be able to make up the lost goods trade with the EU. We probably will specialise more in services. They are more global, but there will still be an economic loss, and that is what the forecasts have shown.
Eve Burton Senior, this idea of a level playing field. Is the problem here that the UK is trying to have all the benefits of being in the EU without being in the EU?
Well, I would say that the Europeans have to make an effort on this aspect, because, of course, a level playing field within the single market is a necessity. But as soon as a country is not any longer member of the European single market, the level playing field is not totally there. In our trade with China, there is no such level playing field. The difficulty with the UK is that now that we speak, I mean, it's exactly the same norms applied in the UK and on the continent. So the problem is to manage the divergence of norms, the normative divergence. And of course, it's key for the Europeans, because if we still offer free access to the Brits, they need to comply with our rules. And if they choose, because they are sovereign, to diverge, yes, there should be some restrictions. And apparently the discussions are focusing on this, because of course it's key for the Europeans in economic terms, because that would be unfair competition from a very powerful neighbor, by the way. And of course I see that for the UK it's sensitive in political terms, since the fact to be sovereign again is to mean, well, we can do whatever we want. But you can do whatever you want, of course, provided you don't pretend to trade freely with the continent. So I hope that a balance will be met, and I'm quite confident a balance will be met, even if the level of trust is minimum, but at least on the wording, a balance met between the fact to maintain an access which is in the interest of the UK, because we, the Europeans, are by far its most important partner, and the Europeans, so to have an access maintained under certain conditions and with possible restrictions is massive divergence were to happen.
Eve, thank you very much indeed. As you were talking, we saw once again Boris Johnson driving that bulldozer through that wall with "Get Brexit Done" written on it, and it looks kind of ironic right now, doesn't it? a year on after that, and still no real advance, and still we're waiting for things to happen. And Dave Keating in the corridors of power there in Brussels, where he waits, listens for the whispers that are coming from these meetings. Dave, if you look at what the British media says, you think it's all about fishing. But this level playing field on the trade deal, am I right in saying, is this really the big sticking point? Is this really the big issue that is separating the two parties?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I keep hearing that this deal is not going to flounder on fisheries, pardon the pun. The fisheries, they are pretty far apart, but it's just inconceivable that such a small part of both sides' economies would sink a deal like this. The level playing field is the real block here because it goes to the heart of what Brexit is. It goes to the heart of what people were promised during the referendum. From the EU's perspective, the UK is trying to achieve something here that it promised people, that it could still have the same or something similar to its level of access to the EU's market without having to follow EU rules. And the EU is saying that's never been done before for a European country. The UK can point to, Japan, Canada, all of these free trade deals. Those are countries on the other side of the world with an infinitesimally smaller amount of trade with the EU than the UK has. I mean, here in Europe, in Western Europe, you've got Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, which are in the EU single market and therefore have to follow almost all EU rules. The UK isn't asking for that level of access, but they do want tariff-free access to the EU's market, and there is no European country that has that without on a level of alignment with EU rules. On the UK side, though, they have a fundamental problem here, because if it's seen that the UK rules are being dictated by Brussels or even overseen by Brussels in any way, then it seems to defeat the purpose of Brexit, because the purpose of Brexit was to break free of Brussels rules, and this is the worrying thing for the EU, the theme on the campaign trail in the referendum was deregulation, that they want to cut red tape. And now they're telling the EU, we won't deregulate, don't worry, we have excellent standards, you don't have anything to fear from us. But it's the opposite of what they were saying in the referendum campaign. So of course, from the EU side, it's reasonable to be suspicious that the UK intends to deregulate and intends to unfairly compete with the EU while having tariff-free access to the EU's market.
So, David Henry, just to bring you in to talk economically here, is one of the ironies that Brexit was, the referendum was won on the slogan of taking back control. But now is there a possibility that, in fact, what will happen is that the EU will have more control over what happens in the UK, how it trades, how it does things, by virtue of the fact the UK is not part of the club anymore?
Well, to a degree, it's always a balance. And I think one of the problems inside the UK was, and still is, the idea that we can have absolute sovereignty and absolute control. In the modern trading world, that doesn't happen. The EU has a lot of control and power over her standards and regulations, but even the EU doesn't have absolute control and power, given the need to trade. So the UK is certainly not going to have that. In many aspects, it will have to follow EU rules, whether because of the treaty or simply because it wants to trade in the future. On the other hand, there will be areas the UK can and will choose to diverge in. So I think that's a complex question. I don't think we can reduce it down to a simplification of saying the UK will either have a lot of more control in the future or will not have. And I think that's one of the problems in the UK, is that we try to reduce it to a simplification, and simply that hasn't worked.
Indeed, that was one of the issues about the whole Brexit referendum, wasn't it? That the question was asked without really explaining what it meant.
Well, that's right. There never has been a very clear idea for what Brexit meant. But the slogan of take back control, seductive though it was, I think also plays to the political realities in a number of countries and the way the global economy works. So I think there is a notion about the UK having more control. It's just that can be achieved in many different ways. It's been taken in a certain interpretation of the moment, a rather strong interpretation, which suggests total sovereignty, which isn't really available. So that is going to need to be reworked in the years to come.
Let's bring in Uta Steiger again, who in the first part talked about tough negotiators. And I don't think they came any tougher, Uta. And I'm sure all the other panellists agree. I don't think negotiators from the UK came any tougher than Margaret Thatcher, who was key in the setting up of the single market. I wonder what she would feel about what's happening right now, whether you're a fan of hers or not. I wonder what she would feel about this thing right now, because the line from senior Conservatives that we've heard is that they feel that the present leadership is making a complete mess of the situation.
it's very hard to know what Margaret Thatcher might have said to the current circumstances. I suppose she would never quite expected us to be in that place. Now, you might recall that she was indeed one who brought us, who argued very much in favour of the UK entering what was then the European Community to begin with. She was also very much in favour of a single market integration, but she was also very keen on particular areas of national sovereignty, and in the end lost her job, not least because of that hesitation towards the European project. And she got obviously a lot of skeptics in her wake. Nowadays, actually, it's the sort of visions she set out for a Europe of nation states would actually no longer be considered very radical at all. If you read the Bruges speech that she gave, you would see them probably much more of the spirit of the times, if you like. Now, at the same time, and your contribution on Chris Patten made that quite clear, there is a big deep split within the Conservative Party about what is considered truly conservative with regard to Europe. You have to remember, of course, that both parties are deeply split on the question of European membership, have been always, and that even in the beginning, it was the Conservative Party arguing in favour of entering the European Community and staying therein, whereas Labour took a lot more of a sceptical approach. Where I think you would see Tory grandees, including Thatcher, being rather rattled by is the sort of style of negotiation that's being put forward and the tone that's been employed throughout the negotiations, and also the rather cavalier approach to detail and even to truth that we have seen from the current government, certainly. I would also expect that she might not be all that pleased with the way that the internal market bill had been handled, particularly the clauses that would effectively have meant a breaching of the international law of the withdrawal agreement that the government itself had signed about 10 months earlier. So there are different answers to your question depending on which angle you look at.
So no current Tories in the cabinet speaking out against it either. So it does seem to be there's a whole shift in the Conservative Party in the UK. Certainly those who were there beforehand and sort of served in the system where the UK was in the EU, feeling that this is the wrong way to go. It does show a country that is shifting or is split in many ways. Let's bring in a post on social media from Donald Tusk, former president of the European Council, who was quoting the late John le Carré, the spy thriller writer who's passed away, and basically pointing out, I think we can show you those words right now so we can read them to you, talking about the fact, and I think he was quoting that, I'm not just a Remainer, I'm a European through and through, and the rats have taken over the ship. John le Carré's words, apparently, Donald Tusk quoting them, and perhaps feeling that it suits the situation. Eva Bertoncini, would you agree that this is a situation where the rats have taken over the ship, that basically Britain is being sort of sailed by people who perhaps, shouldn't be in charge of what's happening there?
Well, to be very honest and precise, I saw that some investors who had campaigned for Brexit have now relocated their assets on the continent, which is, yes, quite contradictory and not very honest, if I may say. As regards the politicians, well, all this has a lot to do with identity politics and party politics, because we have been talking about the economy. If it was only the economy, we would manage our interdependence on the basis of a trade partnership, and I think it's still possible. And yes, the fisheries would not take so much importance. But it's about identity politics and party politics, and by the way, it was about taking control or back control of the Conservative Party first. When David Cameron has launched a referendum, apparently it was also a domestic tool, a party tool to have discipline in his own camp. And the same was true during the battle between Theresa May and Boris Johnson. And I think this is key. So whether they are honest or not, I can't really say, but they are politicians. They are playing with the influences within their parties. And of course, Boris Johnson is particularly special as a politician. His relation to the truth, as it has been said by Uta, is, let's say, not that clear. Now the problem is, will he be able to act without losing the control of his party, because it's a lot about this. So to conclude a deal, because of course you can defend your identity, you can promote your sovereignty while concluding free trade agreements. I mean, a lot of the countries all over the world conclude free trade agreements while being perfectly sovereign to do so. So I hope at the end of the day, the party politics dynamics will allow such a positive deal to emerge, because I believe the Europeans are ready for such a deal, provided some basic conditions are met.
Indeed. And it seems to me those basic conditions continue to be the problem. David, can I bring you back in? You spoke about the workers in Sunderland, the people up there. Eve was just talking about financiers locating their business into the EU, which perhaps indicates in someone's mind perhaps some hypocrisy. I'm thinking of Jacob Rees-Mogg, for instance, who has a finance business as well as being an MP. And there's nothing wrong with people being in business. I'm not against that. If people have that opportunity and they have that drive, great, let them do it. But when he says to people, we've got to get out of the EU, it's bad for everybody, but then he bases one of his offices in Ireland so he can continue to take advantage of being in the EU, it's hypocritical, isn't it? Isn't that the problem, that people are being betrayed on that level, David?
Well, those who campaign to leave the EU, let's be blunt, do not see this as hypocritical. A large number of them think that the EU is either about to collapse or should collapse, and that they think it's very good for the UK to be outside, and that we will see the benefits of that in the future. Another part of them say, look, I can relocate. It's fine. We'll be fine. The country will be fine for this. It is a different way of thinking. Now, you can certainly make a very strong case to say that those who campaigned to leave the EU have misled those in the manufacturing areas who thought that they were voting for more manufacturing, perhaps, and they're not going to get that. But I think there is a mistake in the Brexit narrative to kind of assume that everybody was misled, that it's very hypocritical and shameful, in fact, politicians who did it. Yes, there are elements of that, but there is something at the heart of this, which is about an uneasy relationship with Europe, which is, frankly, about an uneasy relationship between the periphery and the capital, which we've seen in different ways come out in different countries. So I think that this has taken people by surprise. I don't think it's been handled in a terribly positive way, but I think you do need to understand that there's a lot going on in this picture, and the UK is going to have to find ways through that. We've chosen to take a 52-48 referendum as a vote for a very strong form of Brexit. I suspect we'll see in the years to come a softening in that. I suspect the relations will grow closer again. The UK may never be a member of the EU again, but I think we will see closer relations. Geography rather dictates that.
Indeed, but Boris Johnson, with his 80 majority, the landslide of last year, on the pledge of getting Brexit done, is still in a position where he's not able to deliver. And isn't that his problem? His big political problem is that he can't do that, David.
A lot of leaders have the problem at the moment of not really being able to deliver what they promise with regard to the economy or bringing back manufacturing. It's a modern political and economic issue that has been going on for some time, and frankly does lie at some of the heart of the original vote to leave. Politicians are going to have to get used to that. I'm not clear where the UK economy is going from here, so I don't think that the Prime Minister is either. I think he goes down well, though, with many people in the UK just because he is so positive continually. But there's no question in my mind we face a lot of challenges to come, and we've not really discussed them, and it is going to be a tricky time for the UK.
Indeed, the positivity thing, that's something that's really been pushed by the Conservatives and has impressed many people, it's fair to say. David, thank you very much indeed. We're running out of time, but I'm going to steal some more time from my producer, who will tell me off, and bring in Uta Steiger for a final comment. Uta, if it's a no deal, is it a disaster for the UK? Is it a disaster for the EU? Do you see positives, perhaps, that could come from that?
I don't think there's any positives from no deal, no. The outline of the disaster would depend on how long it goes on for. The no deal situation, is it going to be short-lived? Because at some stage, both parties need to return to the negotiation table. There's no doubt about it. It will also depend, obviously, on the UK side and the EU side, how well people will be able to adapt to a radically changed environment. Positive outcomes from it there isn't. It will deepen the distrust that's happening on both sides. It will deepen the blame narratives that have already been circulating. It's not going to make things easier when people then return to the table, which where they will find themselves looking at the same questions they've been having so far. So there is really a responsibility on both sides to make the deal happen.
Uta, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Uta Steiger from the UCL European Institute. Thanks to David Hennig from the UK Trade Policy Project and the European Centre for International Political Economy. Thank you to Yves Berenzini, expert on Europe and president of the Mouvement Européen France. And thanks to our very own Dave Keating, our correspondent in Brussels, who will bring us every development as it happens. And thanks to you for watching too. You're watching France 24. Please stay with us.